My name is Brad. I'm an alcoholic. Yeah, a lot of gratitude to be sitting here. It's been a really eventful year, all good. Really been an amazing journey. I remember sitting here in the seat about a year ago. Not in the seat, sorry. It was at the Cuddy Sark at the time, listening to speakers sharing their various milestones and that. And I would sit there and I would listen and I would drift off in the first few minutes when the preambles came through or when the traditions were mentioned. I couldn't relate, I'd listen to this and I'd just see my mouths moving and it didn't mean a thing to me, and I'd listen to somebody sharing and I'd hear their story, they grew up in a different neighborhood to me, or they were different ethnic class or different sexual persuasion. I switched off there and then. I couldn't identify with I couldn't see the similarities. All I could see was the differences, and I was like that for a long time in treatment. I was fairly judgmental. I'd look at people, think they were a lot worse off than me, that they hadn't lost as much as I had. They were too young. What did they know? I had that with me in my early recovery for quite a long time, and it managed to get me into a fair bit of trouble. So bearing that in mind, like when I use, as I say, the traditions didn't mean a lot to me in the early days and that, but to look at it now, and that when I use the word, I'll use the word alcohol to note any mood or mind-altering substance, or any pills, powders, potions, pilsners, pints, performance enhancements, anything to that effect. I'll use the word alcohol. You can read between the lines if you want. But for me, that was my journey. It was more disease of behavior than anything else. And I think probably the easiest way to try and get some sort of identity is to jump right into, I suppose, start a year ago at my rock bottom. Ground zero, as the big book calls it, the jumping off place. That's where I was, the 19th of January, 13th of January, I found myself on a deserted beach at Glen Ashley contemplating suicide. On the surface of it, everything looked okay. I was, recently married. I had a lovely 3-year-old daughter, house in Umhlanga, nice car, good job. But at the end of the day, that wasn't enough for me, I needed more, and I'll try to find it in a bottle or potion or powder or whatever you have, and to try and get some sort of identity how my life was, how I managed to wake up in the morning, not get out of bed, absolutely exhausted, get out of bed, go around, meet a Nigerian under the bridge to be able to get through the day, wait for a bottle store to open at 9 o'clock, get through until 12 o'clock, and then have got absolutely nothing done. My mind would be racing. I'd be paranoid, thinking people were chasing after me. I was convinced people were trying to take me out. I would duck into alleys in my car and look for people following me. I fired my spear gun through doors and garages, thinking there were intruders behind there. Emails, couldn't just receive an email. I'd have to look at it and see if there was a Trojan horse on it. I picked my cell phone apart, pulled the GPS out, put tape over the camera. I was pretty fucked, and that's where this disease took me. And you'd think that having a lovely wife and daughter and that sort of stuff would be enough. My mind was so consumed with myself and who was after me and what was going on that I couldn't see any of the beauty around me. I was spiritually bankrupt. I got myself into a huge financial mess. I became secretive. I lied. I took money out of my wife's bag. I then said I didn't, and I just was on a complete mess. I would go to an ATM and I would never draw out the same one twice because somebody might see me. Fuck, there's a camera there, get real. And I kept my bank affairs secret. I lied about where the money was going, and eventually the hole got too big for me. And I'm embarrassed to say that my rock bottom was caused probably by financial insecurity. It wasn't the fact of losing my wife or my daughter or my house. It was the fact that I was running out of money and I couldn't sustain this lifestyle. So for me, that was my rock bottom. I ended up down on a beach at Glen Ashley. I had this wonderful house in Umhlanga. I didn't do any DIY, any gardening, but I managed to find 2 creepy crawly pipes and put them together and tried to gas myself in a diesel car. 101, doesn't work. All I did was get a major headache, ran out of diesel, and next minute the tide had come in and swamped my 4x4. There were waves coming through it, and it was a lunatic running around in a sea of vodka bottles and packets and stuff like that, running with a laptop away from the scene of the crime. Then try to concoct some sort of bullshit story how I could get paid out on insurance on it, but of course, the evidence was overwhelming, and at the end of the day, that was my rock bottom. I decided to come into treatment and try and find help, and as I say, I went to a couple of meetings that Scott chaired. I sat there. I didn't relate one iota. These promises, I thought they were a load of shit. there's no ways that they could come true. The traditions, all I thought about traditions were a bunch of old men drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes at AA meetings. For me, that I couldn't relate. I had other issues. But that was my rock bottom. And on the 19th of March, I came into treatment down here. It was going to be only for 28 days because that's all I could afford in the medical aid. The money was a huge issue. I'd had to rent my house out, which was the end of the world, our house out. And all I could see was that I wasn't going to be living there anymore. I'd been kicked out for lying and, being full of shit and just being a shit husband, for such a long period of time. So that's the worst, that's the end of the road, was supposedly sort of the end of the road for me. But, I take a step back and have a look at it, and how did I get there? I look back at my childhood, and I'm not going to bore you with it but it was completely normal. There's no incidences that stood out, no abuse, no traumatic incidences that happened to me to make, for me to go down this path. My father was an alcoholic. My sister's recently retired from work to concentrate on her drinking, so I suppose it runs in the family. So maybe I was off to a poor start to start with. But you know what, I was a good student. Did well at school, did exceptionally well at sports. I did everything that I could possibly do, and I did very, very well. The only thing I could imagine is that, my father wasn't probably as, didn't praise me enough for what I did. He was a good footballer. I played football, cricket, tennis, everything, and, all he would pick out if I'd got 100 or 80 would say, that was a terrible shot you got out to. He would never tell me how well I'd done up to that point. So there was, I suppose, a little bit of resentment there. But in hindsight, I picked up my first drink at the age of 18. I went to university, I studied law, I did my law degree there. But if I look back over my period of childhood, there was definitely something that wasn't like 100% with me in my way of thinking, And it was always to cut corners, how can I say, to find an easier, softer way to do things. I never had consequences that came for me, which is probably why I lasted so long. I was 49 when I came into treatment, had my 50th in treatment. But there's a lot of things. I never had consequences early on. I was always bailed out by my parents. Drinking wasn't an issue, but it was always, as I say, cutting corners. If there was somebody that was shining the cricket ball with a bottle top of the field, it was me. If there was somebody trying to source Ephedrine to play rugby, it would be me. And you know what I mean? It would be 2 for the forwards because they're stupid, and 1 for the backs because you need to be able to have some sort of dexterity in your hands. And when I studied law, it was always to find an edge. I always took too many crayfish, shot too many fish, ducked from the parks board, and that was me, and I didn't think anything of it. I thought I was pretty, by knowing the law pretty well, I could find loopholes, and I could survive that way. Also had lots of groups of friends. I think I did that in the sporting world, and that I did that mostly because maybe I was scared of being found out by one group, So I would fit amongst different ones, and always trying to prove myself, like being good at whatever I did, And like I really excelled. Did my law degree, and then I went off to the army, and I'd like to say there was an incident that gave me post-traumatic stress disorder, but I was the legal officer and spearfishing captain at Natal Command, so there wasn't much trauma there for me either. I suppose drinking became a part of my life at university, as it does. When I was 18, I suppose, after cricket, after rugby, we drank, and to me it all seemed good, clean fun. I could compartmentalize at that point. I would train in the gym, and I would have a few beers after cricket or whatever the story is, but it never became an issue. There was the odd bar fight and the odd accident and that sort of stuff, but to me that was just what happened. It was just normal, being young and carrying on. And as I say, never had many consequences, landed a good job and doing law and that, and I did tax law, which means it's fairly, I don't know the word is, but it's fairly adversarial. You're up against a tax man, you're creating funny structures and stuff. Some of them are legal. I'd like to call them cutting edge. Some people might call it evasion. But I got paid fairly well for doing that, and it was always trying to keep one step ahead of that. And that's really where my defects of character, would come through. Would always be to use what I knew, my knowledge. There was no Google in those days, so it was actually, you went to the library, and I used to get obsessed about certain things, like for example, I remember getting concussed one day playing rugby, and I was really, really small at that stage. So I went and Googled how I could get big quite quickly and that, and obviously the thing was some performance enhancing stuff, and I knew that my dad had medical aid, and I went down to the pharmacy and a doctor and I got a script, and I remember 1985, it was 360 rand for 3 ampules of the stuff or whatever, and he hit the roof, you know. I was entitled. I thought, well, fuck it, you know what, you want me to get fucked up every weekend or whatever the story is, and you know, I saw it from my point of view, it was just the way it was, and I think that's really the journey that progressed. You know, I had carried on articles, always good jobs, you know, and ended up doing a really good job with Rugby World Cup, becoming the legal advisor there. I travelled, I watched rugby, I got paid. I mean, from there, every job was going to be downhill. And, you know, I progressed. And I think probably the seminal moment in all of this was I only discovered when my sporting career came to an end. My dad died very suddenly, and for me, I took it upon myself. I took it badly because I didn't have a chance to say goodbye to him. In fact, I'd had an argument with him that morning. I was off to play golf, and we had words, and I came back, and there was a hearse in the garden, and I thought it was my grandfather. It was actually my father. And I always thought, you know, he's an alcoholic. I was relatively embarrassed about him. I wouldn't get people around to the house. He was the type of alcoholic that I always envisaged an alcoholic was, you know, like he was, but he wasn't really, you know, someone that you wanted to parade in public, and he would, you know, he was unhygienic and all that sort of stuff, and I was like fairly embarrassed about him. But when he died, I didn't have a chance to say goodbye on my terms, and that did affect me. I mean, I think after that, I was in my 30s. I probably got the end of my sporting career. I got involved in sort of with some mates, Durban sort of underground and that sort of stuff, and I used my legal talents to get a few people off some charges, and I got involved in a few, let's just say that they were some type of schemes that weren't really befitting of someone that's supposed to uphold the law. And I got sucked into this underworld, you know, that I had to replace the sport and that sort of thing with something else, and it became that, you know, getting to the front of the queues and clubs and being seen amongst, you know, people that really ran Durban and that sort of thing. And I really liked the fact that I was getting some sort of affirmation and that. And anyway, I met my wife, who, funnily enough, it would have been in a nightclub, and we had what I thought was a wonderful relationship for many years. You know, like it was we lived a good life. We travelled, we had no responsibilities. We went to all overseas, went diving, and stuff like that. And I thought it was great, but you know, it was really from a selfish point of view. I would, you know, we did whatever I wanted to do, which in hindsight, I see that now. At the time, it was, you know, I never saw it. And things progressed. I think I started to get the first signs of the paranoia and the fear when my car got pulled over by, it was the Scorpions in those days, I think. And I sort of had a view that they were onto me for some sort of reason. And from then, I started to imagine that I'd been followed, and that it was funny to start with. But you know, as I say, I told you where it ended up. You know, that lonely, anxious place. We're hearing helicopters, which is not surprising because it's right next to Virginia Airport. But I would hear them consistently. And yeah, it led down that slow road. And if I could say that I saw the signs coming, I didn't. I think everybody around me saw the signs. People pointed out that, you know, that you know, things are starting to go pear-shaped here, and I never saw it, and I didn't believe it, and I didn't listen. And slowly, I think the worst part was when we got married. And like everything else, I fucked up the wedding night. I fucked up everything. I wouldn't go to anniversaries, birthdays. I'd forget. It was all about me. You know, if I didn't feel well, let's celebrate your birthday on this day or do that. And you know, all that stuff starts to wear down. You know, I was married to a woman that's put up with so much shit. You know, and you know, if I look back in hindsight, you know, obviously there's nothing I can do to change that. But my behavior really was appalling, and I couldn't see at that point. You know. I think the worst part was when she became pregnant and she stopped drinking all of a sudden, and I couldn't. Suddenly I realized what a problem I had, because I started to find reasons to go and buy bread and milk. I started to come back a few hours later. I had the worst pregnancy ever. I mean, I was hysterical. My ankles swelled up. I was weepy. You know, I didn't care what she was going through, and I made it all about me, this pregnancy. You know, and at the end of the day, I think she'd outgrown me, you know. She realized that I was just used to company with a bottle. Even I delivered my daughter, which was the most amazing thing in the world, you know. to have that in your hands and not to be able to stay sober for that is incredible. You know, I would lie, towards the end, I would go to a room and lie there and think, you know, I can stay sober for you. I can lie down there and say, please, God, keep me sober. And in the morning, I'd be digging some money out of a money box to go to the bottle store. You know, so that's where this disease took me. Not proud of it. You know, I put that little angel in a car seat and drove and met Nigerian under the bridge. I did stuff that I'm absolutely appalled to say that I did these days, you know, and fortunately for me, I'd have a chance to try and make amends through this program. But getting back to coming into treatment, I got dropped off in uncertain terms that I wasn't welcome back again. I'll take one step back. Obviously, this behavior that I've described is not normal. You know, it's not rational. I was taken. I was sent to, as most of us are, to a psychiatrist. You know, psychiatrist and psychologist, and he had to listen to this. And of course, being a good alcoholic, I told him I just did recreational amounts of alcohol and the occasional line of coke. You know. And he thought, well, okay, then there's something a lot more serious than what you're letting on. And I got prescribed this medication for ex-murderers. Like, it's something that just stops your brain from working. You don't care if there's a helicopter around, you're just not interested, you know. And I tried to function at work, and it was like having an endless video rerun in your head going around. You could formulate thoughts, and you couldn't do anything. So I manipulated him and told him that I couldn't get out of bed in the morning. I got prescribed Ritalin. I know you're not supposed to, but to be able to function at work, but still I carried on with my drinking and it was just a toxic mess. You know, my health suffered. I would wake up anxious. I would vomit. I couldn't stop going to gym. Couldn't eat. I lost weight. I was gaunt. My mind would just go at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I'd be going to kids' parties at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and my mind would be, who could I manipulate to get money? How was I going to get through the day? What time did the bottle store open? Could I make an excuse to get there? And I liked the idea of being a father, walking with my daughter hand in hand and looking the part, but fuck, I was nowhere, you know. And 10 to go. Okay. So anyway, I went into treatment, and on the outside, I'd been to a few meetings. I'd seen these 12 steps. 9 were all right. 2, 3, and 12 are not interested. The spiritual aspect of it wasn't there. I wasn't interested in it at all. You know, a power greater than me, handing my will over to something I couldn't see, that was intangible, wasn't for me. 12, helping others, fuck them, I wasn't interested either because I needed to help myself, you know. So from 9 out of 12, I thought that maybe I had a chance. As I say, finances were an issue. I was going to just be in for 21 days and then get out and start a new job. And in the interim, I'd resigned from my job. And I'd gone into treatment, and I was busy been interviewed at another job, and I was on the anti-booze to make sure that I couldn't drink, and I went and did these psychometric tests because I needed to be fairly sober, and all I saw on these things were paint splatters, and you had to look at like things, and all I could see was death, destruction, demons, and naturally I didn't put that down in my answers, but that's all I could see. I couldn't see any good in it. Anyway, so came into treatment, and I just want to share how, you know, the 21 days was enough for me. The sobriety was enough for me to start to reflect. You know, there's questions in step 1 and that are there for a reason. You know, if you don't remember something, another one will trigger something, which will trigger something, which will trigger something. And for me, what happened was, while I was doing the step work in peace and quiet, I started to remember like some events that had happened in my life. You know, and one of them was, and I'll share this because it's relevant, is about 15 or 16 years ago, I'd come to a friend of mine who's subsequently committed suicide to a party at Glenashley Beach. At about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I decided it was hot. I was going to go for a swim in the sea, and I went for a swim. And that's the last I remember. At about 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock in the evening, I came to a kilometer off Virginia Airport, treading water, swimming, pitch black. Don't remember a thing for 4 hours in the water. Swam in, saw the party was still going, had another tequila, and carried on. And 15 years later, I mean, that's not normal, you know. 15 years later, I looked back at that and thought, there's no reason I should be alive. And then I started to piece together, you know, various other things. Like, I'd been shot at on 2 occasions. One time, a gun had jammed in a robbery. I'd nearly blown myself apart in an elephant reserve in Mozambique with a whole depot of petrol, and it had burnt around me. I'd been in a storm out there with 4 guys on a boat, fishing, that had come through that should have turned the boat over and destroyed us, and we managed to get through. And I started looking at all these different things, and I started to see things differently. It was enough for me to realize that somebody had been looking after me all this time. You know, there's definitely been a force in my life that had a bigger plan for me. And then when I learned the word for this, and there's a wise Canadian man in the room here as well that speaks a lot of sense, and sometimes you don't see it immediately, but the penny dropped at some point. I was able to put together all. Don't worry, it's my daughter. So I was able to put together all of these things, and there's a word for it, and it's amazing. The word is called synchronicity. It's and the reason I use it is because it was coined by Dr. Carl Jung, who treated Roland Hazard in the Big Book. It's mentioned in there, and it's about apparent coincidences or random occurrences that have a deep meaning to the person involved, and how you can piece them together to get a deeper meaning in your life. And these things had happened, and I'd never been able to piece it together, and suddenly I was able to believe that there was a power greater than me, that these incidents over the course of my life, near-death experiences and things that, how you explain them was, there was a reason for me being around, and then it became easier for me to believe. But handing it over, well, that was a different story, you know. I handed over all the things I could, like the finances. I handed to my wife, and she paid off bills, and she did stuff on the outside, and she raised my daughter. And you know, didn't have a cell phone, I didn't have other stuff to distract me, I didn't have a computer and all that sort of stuff. So it was easy to hand that over. But other things happened in treatment. The financial thing, I was only there for 21 days. Suddenly, what happened was, I hadn't read the small print in my employment contract. I was in a 3-month restraint of trade that I'd signed, obviously because I was so good at my job. They told me that I couldn't go and work for anyone for three months, which, you know, was a bit laughable at that stage, but it meant I could pay 3 months' salary out while I was in treatment. Now, one of the questions in my step 2 was, what does the God of your understanding not able to do? And I said, he can't pay my debit orders, and he can't pay other things. And he can't pay my bills. And suddenly in front of me, my bills were being paid. There was a salary coming that was completely unexpected. People might say, well, you know, you should have read the small print. But to me, that's synchronicity. That's how it works. You know, for me, that's what got me to believe. And, you know, I'm sure for other people, it would be different things. So that was the small things that got me to believe. And I think early on in my recovery, I needed to see these things. Because if I hadn't seen them, I don't know which way my path would have been. But I think I was more receptive to look at them because the alcohol had gone. I was able to see things. You're at rock bottom. There's only one way, it's up, and you need to grab at these things. And the more I let things go, the better things came for me. Eventually, I landed my job. I was told that I was going to start in July. How are we doing for time? Okay, I'm on the final run. So I got this job, and this was one of the promises that manifested itself. I mean, in spite of everything that had happened, I still had my house. It was rented, hanging on to my marriage by my fingertips. I was able to have a relationship with my daughter. And I had a job that had landed in spite of where this disease had taken me. And that was in a few short months. And that's where I found that the problem comes in. When things start going well, I start to take my will in my will back. Instead of seeing that this has worked up to this point, let me just carry on letting it go. And led to an unfortunate incident. I realized now that doing your steps is different from practicing these steps in your everyday occurrence. Step work and working the steps are two completely different concepts, you know. And I finished the steps quite quickly because, as I say, I thought I was there for a short period of time. And, you know, the old arrogance and that started to come back. And one of the things I always pride myself on is like I like to be right. Doesn't matter if anyone else is going to be harmed or whatever. And I was involved in an incident up at the house where some youngster came and challenged me and said something, and I headbutted him. And I had my first leaving group in a police van from dropped down in Scottsboro. You know, I didn't have the urge. The program had worked up to that point because I hadn't had the urge to drink. I went and had my cell phone. I went and stayed at a place down in Park Ready, and I figured out what's going on, and I phoned my wife, and excuse my language, but I phoned her and I said to her, this is the story. She said, you better phone Keith. I said, why? She said, you know, it's 3 months, no alcohol, no drugs, and you still act like a cunt. So for me, that was where I picked up that it's not about the alcohol and the drugs, it's about my personality and it's about my behavior. And that's when I realized that rock bottom and surrender are two different parts in this journey. And I phoned Keith and I went back to POTS for 3 weeks. I went back to every conceivable type of yeah, it was horrendous. For 3 weeks I went back, and yeah, I couldn't go to gym, I couldn't run, I couldn't do anything. I'd have one-on-ones with young guys every day, which was probably the worst part of it at that point. But I learned some sort of humility, and yeah, one of them is still here at the moment, and he's a good mate of mine, so it's fine. It all turned out well. And yeah, I learned there that it's not about the alcohol and the drugs. That my personality defects are there, and I had to work through that, and then I had to be willing after that. I was told by the governor that I needed to stay another month, and I needed to commute to my new job in July, and I commuted from the house to Umhlanga every day, a round trip in my vehicle that had been submerged with water. And there's another miracle for you. Did another 30,000 k's after that. There's definitely God drives a Hilux, and I went and I commuted every day, and I would come back from work and I would take my towel off and I would mop floors, clean dustbins, and do everything. And for me, I think I was very, very fortunate I wasn't just thrown out when I wasn't ready. My sponsor picked up that there was still stuff that needed to be done, and I ended up staying from there. I went to a halfway house where I stayed with some of the guys there and commuted from Scottsboro for another month before I found a place of myself. So my journey hasn't been, I'm not going to sit here and say it's rah-rah or whatever the story is, but I've had incidences as well where for the first time, one of the things where you need to make amends, some of the things that amends is an action. It's not just saying sorry, because I was pretty good at that. It's been able to, I suppose for me, the difference is, how much time do I? 5 minutes, okay. So for me, it's the small things, the spiritual awakening that they talk about. There's not like I expected it, like a thunderbolt coming out the sky or anything to that effect. It's the small things. It's been able to sit yesterday and watch DVDs with my daughter and play Barbie dolls. And I mean, when she was born, all I wanted was a daughter, because I prayed, please have a daughter. I didn't want a son that would come home and say he wanted to go debating and play chess. So I wanted a girl, which is another selfish thing. But to these days, I can just sit and I can be with her. I can be present. I can pay my bills. I can do things. I've got a good job. I'm doing well at it at the moment. But at the end of the day, it's only due to this program. It's the ability to be restored to sanity. I mean, if I tell you from where I came, and without medication, and without anything, having tried everything, the only difference is really been this program. And I mean, for me, I try to replicate what I did in treatment. I try to get up in the morning. I try to get on my knees. I go to gym. I go to work. I go to a meeting in the evenings. They suggested 90 meetings in 90 days to work commitments. I managed to do, I think, 85 in the first 30, 85 in the second, and I'm still doing 4 or 5 a week. And so from somebody that sat here, those preambles that just rambled over my head, now I actually look forward to getting there. The 12th step I've recently took recently. I started, I've had a couple of friends that have been battling in that, and I've been able to be there to listen to it, and it's amazing how therapeutic it is, because it just kickstarts again what I went through. Sometimes you lose that magic that you felt, or that when the penny dropped and you found there is something that's looking after me, or there is a power greater than me. You tend to forget it in everyday life, when you get out there and you start going into the monotony of things, and when there's a newcomer and you see the awe in their eyes and stuff like that, when you can pass on something to them, it just re-kickstarts it for you. So I can see how the 12th step is so necessary to keep us sober. Yeah, I suppose the other thing I've learned is that just because I think things are okay now doesn't mean that everybody else does. And amends are a difficult thing. Sometimes your best amends is just staying away. Sometimes it's just doing the same thing over and over again without expecting a medal. Paying your debit orders. When you're at the shop, you're at the shop. When you say you're at a meeting, you're at a meeting without expecting praise for it, because that's how normal people live, not the way that we did. So I think the expectation has been tempered from my part on anything. I just do it and try and do the next right thing. Amends are, like it's funny how God works, because I had a problem with institutions, like sort of insurance companies and SARS and sort of stuff. How do you make amends to them without going and setting yourself up for sanctions or something to that effect? And for me, for the first time in 20 years, I sent a tax return in, and I was audited, and they asked for everything. Everything came through, and I had to supply paperwork and everything. And at the end of the day, they audited me and said to me that I needed to pay them, I think it was 40,000 Rand this year, which I'm doing. And for me, that's my amends. I've got a clean slate. I don't have that baggage. or anything that holds me back, like all the resentments or anything to that effect. And I'd just like to finish. If I look back at this last year, there's a poem by John Dryden called, by somebody, John Dryden, called Annus Mirabilis, which means a year of miracles or a year of wonders. And I looked at this poem. I remember reading it at varsity, and in it mentions the Great Fire of London and the plague. It's in 1666, and I thought, what sort of miracle was the Great Fire of London or the plague, you know? But if you look at it, if you read it carefully, what happened was the great miracle in the Fire of London was it raised London to the ground. London was a slum. It was full of overflowing sewage. There was, like the slums were there. There was sewage overflowing. It was badly built. There was pestilence, the plague that killed 100,000 people the year before. But the Fire of London only killed 6 people, and it destroyed a whole city. And I thought, what sort of miracle was that? But the point of it is that at the end of the day, that fire destroyed the rats. There was no more plague. The city was able to be rebuilt as a modern city without any of the shit in it that was flowing through it. And that's how I feel like I've had. Some of these things that have happened to me, sort of like a fire in itself, it's not really a great event, but if you see what the after effects and how it's permeated through my life and that sort of stuff, I've been able to rebuild a new city that's free of sewage and free of slums, and hopefully going forward, I don't need another fire to purge it. Yeah, so that's my story. I hope somebody got something out of it, but thanks for letting me share.